They laughed as they hooked the chains to her car, blind to the storm they'd just summoned. She didn't shout. She didn't curse, she simply watched calm, poised and knowing their judgment day was just 10 steps and 1 courtroom away. The morning sun rolled across the cracked sidewalks of Brookhaven, a small southern town where appearances had always mattered more than truths. The courthouse loomed ahead like a relic of the past, white stone, cracked columns and brass doors that hadn't been polished in decades. It was here, on this particular morning, that an event would unfold that no one in town would forget. Judge Mariah Jordan had been transferred to Brookhaven Circuit Court. It's a temporary assignment, though nothing about her arrival was ordinary. Mariah wasn't the kind of woman who moved quietly through life. Even in stillness, she stood out. She wasn't just a woman of color in a position of authority. She was a woman who radiated composure, intellect, and quiet power. Her deep mahogany skin glowed against the navy-black lining of her blazer as she stepped out of her Tesla Model S, a gleaming black vehicle that somehow seemed to refine for the aging courthouse parking lot. Mariah locked the door with a gentle click, adjusted the sleeve of her fitted jacket, and pulled her structured leather handbag over her forearm. Her silver watch glinted in the morning sun. Her curls, freshly blown out and curled under at the ends, rested softly on her shoulders, undisturbed by the rising humidity. She turned toward the courthouse steps, her heels echoing against the concrete. When she heard it, laughter. It wasn't friendly laughter. It rang out again low, careless and smug, the kind that didn't come from joy, but from mockery. Mariah knew that sound. I had heard it in courtrooms before, right before sentencing. She didn't turn around, not at first. She didn't need to. She felt their eyes crawling up her back like invisible hands, dissecting her, assessing her, misjudging her. "Hey, Jerry," one of the voices said, chuckling. "Reckon she can afford that car, or it's just for show?" Mariah paused. "Probably," least another added, "or stolen. It did it." She slowly turned around. Across the lot, standing near a patrol vehicle, were 2 white-uniformed officers. One tall and rail-thin, with a mustache that clung to his lip like an afterthought. The other was broader, chewing gum, his sunglasses tucked lazily into his shirt collar. Both of them had that lean, the kind of relaxed stance that came from knowing no one would question them. It's not here, not in Brookhaven. They weren't expecting her to look back. Mariah met their gaze directly, calm as water. Her eyes, dark and deep, didn't blink. She didn't say a word. Her silence said enough. And that unnerved them only for a second, but they recovered with more laughter. This time louder, like they were trying to shake off the quiet pressure. Of her stare, "You forgot to pay for the deluxe parking, ma'am," the taller one called out. Mariah tilted her head slightly. "Is that how you greet every citizen parked in a legal spot?" They didn't answer her. They didn't need to. One of them radioed something into his shoulder mic, but his eyes didn't. "Leave her." The other one strolled toward her car, smirking. A tow truck rumbled in from around the block. Mariah inhaled slowly. She wasn't shocked. This wasn't new. Brookhaven hadn't changed. The buildings had aged, but the mentality hadn't moved an inch. Still, she wasn't going to make a scene. That's what they wanted, a reaction, stereotype to point at. But Mariah had long since mastered the art of quiet resistance. She turned back toward the courthouse and walked up the steps. Every heel click sounded like punctuation. She pushed open the doors and entered the cool marble corridor instantly. Feeling the contrast between the humid air outside and the climate-controlled stiffness within, her court clerk, Darlene, a petite woman in her 50s with salt and pepper braids and reading glasses permanently perched on her nose, looked up from the front desk. Judge Jordan, Darlene greeted, already half freezing from her chair. "You're early," Mariah smiled faintly. Good habit to keep. "Everything ready?" "Yes, ma'am. Docket's light today, just pre-trial hearings. Shouldn't take long." And oh, Darlene hesitated, leaning in slightly, lowering her voice. "I heard those boys outside talking. I'm real sorry." Mariah's smile didn't change. "They'll be sorrier." Darlene blinked, then gave a slow nod of approval. "Yes, ma'am." Outside, the officers had begun the process. Metal hooks clanked against the undercarriage of Mariah's vehicle. The tow truck driver, an older man with a stained ball cap and sun-weathered skin, looked mildly amused, but mostly uninterested. Registered to Jordan Mariah, the broader cop muttered, glancing at the screen on his phone. No ticket history, huh?
Ass.
The thin one squinted at the license plate. Out-of-town tags. Maybe she don't know the parking rules here. There's no sign here, the driver pointed out. Shut up and do your job, the broader officer snapped. The driver shrugged. Hey, I'm just here to tow. The two cops watched as the vehicle was hoisted onto the bed, slowly and noisily. A few townspeople passing by glanced over, curious. Most didn't ask questions. Some smiled quietly. Brookhaven had always watched from windows, never doorsteps. Inside. Mariah stepped into her chambers and hung her blazer on the coat stand. She slid on her judge's robe, heavy, black lined with silk. As she fastened the buttons, she looked at herself in the tall mirror leaning in the corner of the room. She looked regal, not because of the robe, but in spite of it. She straightened the collar, adjusted the watch on her wrist, and walked out. Toward the courtroom. The bailiff nodded and opened the side door. All rise, he called out as she stepped into the courtroom. The room stood lawyers, defendants, even the sleepy-eyed man from county records in the back. The two officers from the parking lot entered moments later, chuckling and nudging each other. Then they looked up and froze. Their smirks fell like bricks from their faces. There she was, the uppity woman, one with the Tesla, the one they'd just humiliated and mocked outside, the one they assumed didn't belong. Now seated behind the elevated bench, wearing the robe, holding the gavel, the room fell into perfect, sterile silence. Mariah didn't react. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She simply looked at them, and then she looked away. The silence clung to the walls. Like static, Judge Mariah Jordan flipped open the docket in front of her with precisions, steady, deliberate. The soft shuffling of pages was the only sound in the courtroom, yet it echoed louder than a gavel strike. The two officers, Deputy Tom Griggs and Officer Dale Mercer, stood awkwardly near the back, their feet suddenly heavy, their confidence leaking out like air from a punctured tire. Mariah didn't look at them again. She didn't have to. Case number 401, she said, voice even and smooth. State v. Powell. The attorneys stood. The hearing began. Business resumed. But the balance of power in the room had shifted, and everyone felt it. The air was heavier. Temperature seemed to drop, not in discomfort, but in realization. Griggs and Mercer stayed put, unsure whether to leave or stay. Leaving would be an admission. Staying might mean something worse. They stayed. As proceedings unfolded, Mariah's control over the courtroom was absolute. She listened carefully to each lawyer, measured in her responses, sharp in her observations. Even the defense attorneys who had initially sized her up as a possible pushover based on her age and gender began to adjust their tone. She wasn't just competent. She was precise. Ruthless in logic, but fair in tone. In one case, she dismissed a motion with surgical clarity, citing precedent that neither attorney had brought up. In another, she paused long enough to correct a prosecutor's misquotation of a witness, ensuring the record remained pure. This wasn't a judge coasting on credentials. This was a judge who knew the law, like she breathed it, and still, she didn't acknowledge the two officers in the back, not even a glance, but they couldn't stop looking. At her, by the end of the morning docket, the room had subtly realigned around her. Attorneys didn't look for the clerk's nod. They watched her for every cue. The gallery sat straighter. Even the court recorder, who'd been filing her nails at the beginning, now typed with her back fully upright. The final case was dismissed, due to a clerical error, and Mariah stood court, adjourned, as she turned and walked out the side door. She heard the faint creak of hesitation from the officers behind her. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. In her chambers, she removed her robe and hung it carefully. Her reflection in the mirror met her with calm eyes. That's when the knock came. It was Darlene. Judge Jordan, those two officers are outside, say they want a word. Mariah raised a brow but didn't answer immediately. She fastened The final button of her blazer again. Straighten the collar. Send them in. Seconds later, the door opened, and the two officers entered like schoolboys summoned to the principal's office. Their posture had changed. Gone was the arrogance. From the parking lot, they looked ... smaller, like men who had seen something they couldn't unsee. Griggs spoke first. Your Honor, we wanted to ... apologize. Mariah leaned against the edge of her desk. For which part? The men shifted. Well, I suppose, towing your vehicle? We thought you didn't think, Deputy Griggs, she said. Her voice not raised, but sharper now. You assumed. They said nothing. She continued, cool and controlled. You looked at a black woman in a professional car, carrying professional documents, walking into a courthouse, and you assumed she was suspicious. It's not what it looked like, Mercer tried, but the words felt brittle. Mariah tilted her head. You didn't ask my name. You didn't ask for identification. You didn't ask why I was here. You laughed. You radioed for a tow. Truck Griggs flushed red. We didn't recognize you. You weren't in the system. No, she agreed. I wasn't in your system. There was a long pause. The air between them thickened. Mariah walked slowly to the window and looked out. Her car was still outside, now returned, still sitting at the edge of the lot. Do you know how many times this has happened to me? She asked, her voice lower. Or women who look like me? Neither man answered. Of course you don't. She turned around, eyes meeting theirs directly now. Because in towns like this, you're not taught to see us. You're taught to process us, to control us, to dismiss us. We didn't mean any. It's not about what you meant, she cut in. They stood there, mute, absorbing the quiet condemnation. Finally, Mercer asked, Are we ... being reported? Mariah didn't answer right away. She studied them. They weren't cartoon villains. They were just typical, average, trained by a system that didn't teach accountability until it was forced. She crossed the room slowly and opened a drawer in her desk. Pulled out a document, set it gently on the surface. You'll be undergoing a community conduct review, she said. Voluntary retraining. With me, Griggs blinked. With you? She nodded. Every Friday afternoon, you'll come here. Sit in this chamber and you'll listen. We'll cover history, case law, bias patterns, black jurisprudence. You'll take notes. You'll answer questions. You'll unlearn what you think you know. Or what? Mercer asked, swallowing. Mariah's voice didn't waver. Or I report you, request disciplinary action, and file a formal complaint with the state board. I assure you, they know me. Better than you do? There was no need to threaten. The silence was loud enough. The officers nodded, meek now, more overwhelmed than angry. They took the papers and quietly left. Darlene peeked in a moment later, grinning. I don't think they'll forget this morning. Mariah smiled faintly. Good, that's the point. Outside the courthouse, the town moved on sunlight filtering through trees, cars humming by. But something was different now. In the same parking lot where ignorance had laughed, truth had stood taller. And for the first time in a long time, Brookhaven's soil trembled, not from noise, but from justice, whispered in a voice too powerful to ignore. Later that evening, long after the courthouse had emptied and the sun had dipped below the sleepy roofs of Brookhaven, Judge Mariah Jordan sat in her chambers alone. The thick velvet curtains drawn halfway, soft golden lamplight casting warm shadows against the paneled walls. The courthouse. Quieted at night in a way that no city court ever did. Mariah was used to the hum of life, the buzz of city traffic, the shifting energy of courtrooms stacked high with urgent pain. But here Brookhaven was different. Silence was a curtain. People pulled over things they didn't want to face. She poured a small glass of water and sat at her desk, pulling open her personal journal, a thick, leather-bound notebook she'd kept since law school. Inside were decades of observations, quotes, private rulings, scribbled frustrations no one would ever see. She flipped to a fresh page and wrote quietly, Today, 2 men tried to shrink me. Not with weapons, but with certainty. And I let silence do the heavy lifting. She paused, then added, They still don't understand what it costs to remain calm. but one day they might. Her pen hovered. Because it wasn't just about today. It never was. Mariah had been underestimated her entire life. Born and raised in the south side of Chicago, she'd learned early that brilliance had to be twice as sharp, twice as fast, and twice as silent when it came in black skin. Her father had been a union organizer, her mother a school principal who worked 6 days a week and still managed to braid Mariah's hair every Sunday night while reciting Langston Hughes. "Don't ever give them your temper, baby," her mother would whisper as she parted and oiled her scalp. "Give them your proof, your calm, your brilliance. That's your power." At 10 years old, Mariah had watched her father be arrested for leading a peaceful protest outside a grocery chain that refused to hire black workers. The image of him, cuffed but standing tall, had burned into her bones. She remembered every chant from that day. Not the words, but the rhythm of resistance. By the time she got to Harvard Law, she already knew how to dismantle a man without raising her voice. But today, Brookhaven Shea had nearly slipped. For a moment, when they laughed, when they touched her car like it was some kind of punchline, she had felt something stir beneath the years of training. Rage, not just hers, but generational, collective, a storm made from 100 quiet humiliations. She could have exploded, but she didn't. Because if she had, it would have made her the villain instead. She gave him something they hadn't expected. Education. She thought about Mercer and Griggs as she sipped her water. She didn't hate them. She didn't fear them, but she understood them. And that was more dangerous than either of the other two. They were products of a system that never demanded they grow, never forced them to reflect. Till today. She flipped. Back to an earlier page in her journal. To one written years ago after being passed over for a judgeship in D.C. by a panel of all white men who said she was too passionate and might not bring proper judicial neutrality. She had written, "They say my voice trembles with too much fire. I say they've never stood in a courtroom while being erased in real time. Let me burn, not with anger, with clarity." Soft knock pulled her out of her thoughts. Darlene again. Her faithful clerk never left until she was sure Mariah had packed up. "Everything all right?" Darlene asked, leaning in. Mariah nodded. "Just reflecting." Darlene chuckled. About the look on Griggs' face. "Because, baby, that I will remember forever." Mariah smiled. Not just him. The whole town. "Did you see the gallery today?" "No." "Honey, they sat up straighter than pews on Easter Sunday." They both laughed softly. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was a knowing laugh. The kind black women share when they've both survived the same kind of storm. "You headed home?" Mariah asked. Darlene nodded. "You should too." "I will. Just a few more minutes." Darlene hesitated. "Don't let this town wear you out. They'll come around. Maybe not all at once." "I don't need them to." "Like me," Mariah said, "just to see me." Darlene stepped back. "They do now, loud and clear." When Mariah finally stepped outside, the night air had cooled. The courthouse was lit only by the glow of the lantern-style lights flanking the grand steps. Her car sat safely at the curb, untouched. She walked slowly toward it, her heels quiet against the stone, the weight of the day still trailing behind her. Halfway to her car, she saw something tucked under her windshield wiper. She tinned. Then, gently pulled it free. A note. Handwritten, no envelope. She unfolded it. It read, "Judge Jordan. I was raised not to question the world I inherited. Today I saw something better. I'll be at training on Friday." Deputy Griggs, she stood there, holding the paper, the words lingering in her mind. It wasn't redemption, but it was a beginning. The next morning, Brookhaven woke up different. Not radically, not loudly. But something subtle had shifted, like a hinge on an old door finally oiled. The town paper, the Brookhaven Herald, ran its usual small-town headlines about bake sales and a high school football injury. But page 3 carried a short blurb that made Mariah arch a brow. "New circuit judge presides over landmark pretrial hearings." Sources say Judge Mariah Jordan's session was sharp, orderly, and unlike any seen in recent memory. No mention of the incident in the parking lot. No mention of the officers. but the tone carried weight. It was a soft signal. The town was watching now, quietly, cautiously, and that was enough. Mariah pulled into her parking space, the same one as yesterday, this time without interference. She stepped out of the car, crisp as ever, in a cream-colored pantsuit today, accented by a silver necklace and matching heels. Her curls were pinned in a half-up twist, elegant and regal. Her bag hung from her shoulder like armor. This time, the courthouse security guard at the door stood up straighter when she walked past. "Good morning, Judge," he said. Mariah nodded. "Morning, Mr. Reeves." Inside, Darlene had coffee waiting. Black, no sugar. Just how she liked it. On the desk was a small pile of letters, some legal correspondence, a few official memos, and one envelope with no return address. She opened that one first. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper. It wasn't signed. Mariah read it twice, then folded it and placed it in her journal. As the week passed, word of the new judge continued to spread faster than facts usually did in Brookhaven. Some said she was tough. Others said she was cold. But everyone agreed on one thing. She didn't flinch. By Friday afternoon, Mercer and Griggs appeared outside her chambers at exactly 2 p.m., files in hand. They looked nervous, but sober. This time they knocked respectfully and waited. She opened the door herself. "Ready to learn?" she asked. They both nodded. "Double quotes, no uniforms in these sessions," she said. "Leave the badge at the door." They removed them. Mariah led them inside to a long table where 2 binders were neatly stacked, each marked with a name. Inside, history, case studies, ethical scenarios, and reflections. This wasn't punishment, this was rebuilding. They sat. She began. She started with the story of Judge Jane Boland, the first black woman to serve as a judge in the U.S., appointed in 1939. She told them about Thurgood Marshall arguing Brown v. Board, about the 1963 Birmingham Children's Crusade, about how law enforcement had been both weapon and shield, depending on whose body stood on the other end, and then she told them about herself. Not for pity. For context, she spoke about Harvard, about being passed over, about courtrooms where sheriffs had refused to call her Your Honor and where defense lawyers had assumed she was the stenographer. She told them not just what she had survived, but what she had built in spite of it. For 3 hours, they listened, and to their credit, they didn't interrupt. When the session ended, Mariah stood and said, "Next week we'll discuss accountability and policy and not just behavior." Griggs looked up. "Do we have homework?" Mariah smiled faintly. "Flecked. That's enough for now." They left quietly, but not without a nod. Not without seeing her. That night, as Mariah locked her office, she stepped out into the hallway and saw a young black girl in a school uniform standing near the benches outside the main courtroom. Her mother stood beside her, clutching a small case file. Mariah paused. The mother smiled nervously. "Ma, are you the judge?" Mariah nodded. The girl's eyes widened. "I want to be you someday," she whispered. Mariah knelt slightly, her tone warm but steady. "No," she said. "You'll be better. Because you'll start from a place I had to fight my way to reach." As the girl beamed. Her mother exhaled a quiet breath of pride, and Mariah walked away. Knowing this wasn't just about the robe, it never had been. Outside, the streetlights of Brookhaven flickered on, one by one, spilling golden light across the courthouse steps. The town would test her again. The power structure would push back. Racism, subtle or loud, would find new forms. But it didn't matter. Mariah Jordan was here now, and she was unmoved. Brookhaven was a town where most people didn't say what they thought, at least not in the open. Opinions drifted like pollen through church pews, barbershop chairs, and Bacali BBQ joints. But after Judge Mariah Jordan's courtroom performance during her first week, the town's whispers grew. Louder. Some praised her, some feared her, and some, mostly the ones who'd grown used to unchecked authority, began to push back in subtle, calculated ways. One of those people was Councilman Peter Harlan, a 63-year-old lifelong Brookhaven resident with a comb-over, a tan Cadillac, and a long history of shaping policy from the shadows, Harlan didn't appreciate disruption. And Mariah Jordan was disruption in heels. He sat across from the police chief, Earl Sutter, in a dim corner booth of Lula Mae's diner that Monday morning, stirring cream into his coffee with a slow, angry hand. "I don't like it," he muttered, glaring at the headline on his folded newspaper. Judge Jordan orders. Officer training after parking incident. The article was small, buried under a piece about local crop forecasts, but it was there, and that was enough. Sutter grunted. "Wasn't my call." They embarrassed themselves. "I told Em to own it." "You gave her an inch," Harlan snapped. "Now she's writing policy with her damn black robes." "She didn't write policy. She offered them education instead of formal complaint. That's restraint, if anything." Harlan leaned back, eyes cold. "It's weakness, and she's just getting started." That same moment, Mariah was standing before a packed courtroom preparing to hear the preliminary hearing for the Sanders v. City of Brookhaven case, a civil suit brought by a young black man who claimed excessive force during a traffic stop 2 months prior. It was a case that had made local waves before quietly dying down. But Mariah's arrival had breathed new attention into it. Seated across from the bench were 2 very different tables. At the plaintiff's table sat Devin Sanders, 22, slim with tight coils cropped close to his scalp. A single scar traced the edge of his left cheekbone, a reminder of the night in question. His lawyer, Nia Coleman, was fiery, brilliant, and just a few years older than Mariah had been when she passed the bar. At the defense table, attorney Frank Ridley, a white man in his 50s, with a southern drawl like honey over broken glass. He'd been defending the city for over 2 decades, and losing wasn't something he did often. Mariah scanned the room. The gallery was full. Community members, city officials, local reporters. Some were here for justice. Most were here for blood. She gavelled once. "We're here today to determine whether this case proceeds to full trial." Nia Coleman stood first. Her voice rang clear. "Your Honor, we have body cam footage showing Officer Tim Keating dragging my client from his vehicle after he requested to speak with a supervisor. My client was unarmed, respectful, and complying." Ridley stood slowly. "Judge, if I may, the body cam footage is incomplete." Officers followed procedure. "This is another attempt to vilify police based on limited perspective." Mariah raised a brow. "Limited perspective is exactly why this hearing exists, Mr. Ridley. Let's not pre-argue your closing statement." The courtroom rippled with tension. Ridley nodded stiffly and sat. Over the next hour, clips from the body cam were played. It wasn't what the footage showed that hit hardest. It was what it implied. The shaking frame, the muffled pleas from Devin, the shout of "stop resisting." When there was no resistance at all, gasps escaped from the gallery. Some viewers turned away. Mariah's expression didn't change. She didn't flinch at violence. She had seen worse. But what she felt was heat rising behind her eyes, not from rage, but from the sick familiarity of it all. It had taken Devin for weeks to find a lawyer willing to take his case. It had taken Mariah 40 minutes to decide. This boy deserved his day in court, she ruled quickly. "This court finds sufficient basis for civil trial," she said, her voice ringing through the chamber like steel. "Proceedings will be scheduled for 2 weeks from today. Pre-trial discovery begins immediately. Case is active." Devin exhaled. Ridley's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. Behind them, reporters scribbled faster. The echo of her decision would spread, and Mariah knew it. As the courtroom cleared, Darlene leaned in. "You just kicked a hornet's nest." "Didn't kick it," Mariah replied. "I just stopped pretending it wasn't there." That night, she received her first real threat, an anonymous letter, no return address. Clipped magazine letters on printer paper, sloppy but unmistakable. "Go back to where you came from. We don't need your kind here." Mariah held the letter for a long moment. Then she folded it once, filed it under expected, and slid it into her bottom drawer. She'd gotten worse in D.C. The week dragged on with silent resistance. The mayor didn't return her emails. Local law. Enforcement postponed meetings. One morning, the paper forgot to print her courtroom schedule, a passive-aggressive move designed to make her hearings appear empty or disorganized. But the community noticed. More specifically, the black community noticed, and they started showing up. Retired teachers, grandmothers in sun hats, fathers in mechanic coveralls, or teenagers who'd never stepped inside a courtroom unless in trouble. They filled the benches. Because they had cases. But because they wanted her to know she wasn't alone, they had seen her, and now she was their mirror. The following Monday morning, the courthouse parking lot didn't feel like it had 7 days earlier. A small crowd had gathered outside. About a dozen people, mostly elders and activists from the surrounding counties. They weren't holding signs or shouting. They simply stood, facing the courthouse, backs straight, hands clasped in front of them. A silent protest. Mariah stepped out of her car and paused for a moment as she took in the sight. Their eyes met hers, and though not a word was spoken, the message was clear. We see what they're doing. We see what you're doing. And we are here. Darlene met her at the door. They've been out here since 6 a.m., she whispered. Didn't even bring chairs. Do we know who organized it? Somebody's grandma from Jackson County? Says you're the first judge she's ever trusted? Mariah smiled gently. It's more intimidating than any bar review. Inside the courthouse, however, the mood had turned bitter. Councilman Harlan was working behind the scenes to pull strings. He'd been calling private meetings with city attorneys, whispering phrases like overreach and misalignment of values. He had no legal authority over Mariah. Judges were appointed by the state, but he had influence. And in small towns, influence moved faster than policy. That morning, she received an official notice from the city council. Due to concerns regarding judicial activism and disruption of community trust, the council has voted to request the reassignment of Judge Mariah Jordan to a different jurisdiction. It wasn't binding, but it was loud. Mariah read the notice slowly, folded it, set it aside. Then buzzed Darlene on the intercom. Clear my 10 a.m. I'm going to the council chamber. Darlene's voice crackled. You sure? I'm done letting men throw stones from behind closed doors. The council chamber was a modest room. Inside Brookhaven's municipal building, a dull beige interior, its brown carpet and a table of nameplates arranged like a battleground. Mariah entered through the public gallery doors. Everyone turned. Some stared in confusion, some in fear. Councilman Harlan smirked. Judge Jordan, said, voice dripping with false charm. We didn't expect you. I'm aware. That's the problem. She stepped forward, heels clicking across the carpet, her fitted navy blue pantsuit moving like armor. I received your recommendation. I wanted to be very clear I will not be stepping down. I was appointed by the circuit board in accordance with state law. Your vote carries no legal weight, and your opinion carries even less. Gasps fluttered around the room. Someone in the back muttered, Well, damn. Harlan leaned forward. This isn't personal, Judge. You're disrupting the tone of this community. Mariah cocked her head. The tone. He nodded. Brookhaven runs on peace, not protests. We've never had this kind of accountability, she cut in. Transparency. Justice. He flushed. This isn't Chicago or D.C. we handle. Our issues quietly here. Mariah's voice dropped an octave. Cold. Controlled. And how many people have been buried quietly under that silence, Councilman? The chamber went dead quiet. She continued, never raising her voice. I will be in that courthouse every morning. I will hear every case. And I will not be moved by pressure, prejudice, or political cowardice. She turned to the room. Want a judge who smiles and rubber stamps injustice? You had decades of that? She faced Harlan again. You have me. Then she turned, walked out, and never once looked back. That same day, something unexpected happened. When Mariah returned to her courtroom, there was a small note on her bench. Your Honor, I watched you stand against them this morning. We don't get many fighters in robes. We're proud you're here. A Brookhaven janitor that night. The silent protest outside the courthouse tripled in size. The town was splitting, but something else was happening. 2. Mariah was becoming more than a judge. She was becoming a symbol. The next morning, Sanders' case hit the local news. WDBH6, the regional news affiliate, ran a segment titled, "New Judge Reopens Wounds or Seeks Real Justice." The footage showed Devon's body cam video, then spliced in courtroom clips of Mariah calmly delivering her ruling. The anchorman's voiceover was intentionally vague, as if afraid to lean too far in either direction. But on social media, particularly in activist and black legal circles, the reaction was immediate. Clips of her council chamber speech went viral. A TikTok user dubbed her the realest robe in the South. Young black law students began stitching videos in support. Local poets quoted her. Even a state senator from Atlanta posted, "Brookhaven doesn't know it yet, but Judge Mariah Jordan is what's coming, and they better adjust fast." Mariah didn't post about any of it. She didn't celebrate. She simply showed up the next morning, like always, pressed, poised, professional. She reviewed motions, read pretrial notes, checked evidence timelines. No makeup beyond lip balm. No fanfare, but beneath that calm, she felt the heat rising. The power players in Brookhaven weren't done, and she knew enough to know. They wouldn't come at her head on. They'd come at her through someone else. By the time Thursday came, Mariah's office phone rang less often, but her name was being spoken more than ever. Not in greetings or handshakes, but in strategy meetings, coffee shop whispers, sheriff department backrooms. The boys in blue had started calling her Judge Flashpoint. Some said it with resentment, others with fear, few with quiet admiration, but respect was a currency often hoarded in Brookhaven. And Mariah Jordan wasn't in anyone's old money circle. It started small. First, her mail began arriving late or not at all. Then, a court clerk who'd always been helpful suddenly stopped sharing key filing updates. Her case schedules were updated without her consent, forcing her to scramble into last-minute sessions. On Thursday morning, she walked into court to discover an entire defendant roster had been flipped. Public defenders hadn't been notified, and chaos ensued. She suspected sabotage, but she didn't have proof. So instead of accusations, she responded with precision. After court, she stayed behind and memorized the new caseflow system, then cross-checked it with her original documents. She spotted 6 inconsistencies, one of which would have illegally expedited a known white supremacist's vandalism, case into dismissal. She didn't yell. She didn't send an angry memo. She filed a quiet report to the State Judicial Oversight Committee that night. Someone slashed her tires. She didn't call for backup. She called a black-owned tow truck company from a nearby town. The driver, a man in his 40s, named Reggie, showed up in 20 minutes, lifted her Lexus silently, then looked her in the eye and said, "Ma'am, whatever they try, don't let M run you off. You've been waiting on a judge like you since my granddaddy's granddaddy." She nodded once. Her voice stayed low. "They'll have to drag me." Reggie nodded. "Out. Then I'm staying parked out front every morning for the rest of the week." He did, and others followed. By Friday morning, 3 local black businesses were donating security detail, legal print services, and daily meals to her courthouse team. But enemies adapt, and this time they used someone close. Marshal Brian Keyes was in charge of courtroom security. 50-something former state trooper, Keyes had always been polite, stiff, but polite. He wore his uniform like body armor, always had a toothpick in his mouth, rarely said more than necessary. But after her ruling in Sanders v. City was announced, his tone changed. He stopped opening her door, stopped standing when she entered, stopped saying "Your Honor" when he didn't have to, she noticed, and she filed that knowledge away. It was Saturday afternoon when the breach happened. Mariah had stayed behind to prepare trial notes in her office. Colleen had gone home. The courthouse was technically closed. That's when she heard the click, the quiet sound of a door unlocking from the outside. Mariah stood, heels silent on the floor, and moved behind the coat rack near her bookshelf.
Ow.
The door creaked open. Marshal Keyes stepped inside. He didn't notice her at first. He was focused on her desk. He moved straight to her drawers and began pulling them. Okay, Mariah waited 5 seconds. Then she stepped forward. I believe that drawer's above your pay grade. He froze, turned caught. Your Honor, he started, hand moving toward his hip. She didn't flinch. Don't reach. I already activated my body cam. It's live. She hadn't, but he didn't know that. Key slowly raised his hands. You're trespassing on a judge's private space without a warrant, after hours. That's not just unethical, it's a felony. I had reason to believe there was contraband. Stop lying. Silence. He stared at her, eyes cold. Who sent you? She asked. More silence. I'll give you one chance, Marshal. I speak truthfully, or I make you famous by morning. He hesitated, like Councilman. Councilman Harlan wanted intel, said you. We're bringing an external influence to alter judicial direction. Mariah stared. Not just sabotage, they were trying to frame her, set her up, discredit her rulings with planted documents or recordings. She nodded slowly. Get out. Report this incident directly to the state judiciary. If you ever step in my space again, I won't report it. I'll end it. Marshal Keyes backed out slowly, face unreadable. Mariah locked the door behind him. Then she slid down into her chair. Shaking not from fear, but from the pressure she'd kept buried all week. But she didn't cry. She never cried in war. And this was war. She picked up her phone. Darlene, she said, when the line picked up. Her assistant answered groggily. Ma'am, it's 11 p.m. Mariah's voice was steel. Call the state press. Call WDBH. Schedule an interview. I want every camera in town at the courthouse steps by Monday morning. It's time they hear my side. Monday arrived like a warning bell. Brookhaven hadn't seen a press crowd this big in decades. Camera vans lined the courthouse lawn. Porters scribbled frantically as techs adjusted boom mics and lenses. A drone hovered above, live streaming. To an online audience that had swelled into the hundreds of thousands, people didn't just want justice anymore. They wanted the woman who demanded it. At 9:03 a.m., the courthouse doors opened, and Judge Mariah Jordan stepped out. She wasn't dressed in her robe today. Instead, she wore a tailored black pantsuit with sharp lapels and a cream silk blouse that shimmered under the sun. Her hair was pulled into a sleek twist, her pearl earrings glinting like punctuation marks. Her heels clicked once on the stone steps, and then she stood still, poised, back straight. Eyes forward, silence fell over the crowd, and then she spoke. I never intended to be a public figure. I came to Brookhaven to do the work of justice, not the theater of politics. But it has become clear, silence is not an option. A ripple. Move through the crowd. Over the past 2 weeks, I have been harassed, sabotaged, and violated, not by criminals, but by those sworn to uphold the law. Camera shutters snapped rapidly. Council members attempting to alter judicial proceedings. Court security breaking into my office. Evidence tampering. Internal data manipulation. And through it all, the assumption that I would be too afraid, too quiet, or too grateful to push back. She looked directly at a row of council aides. In suits, I am not afraid. I am not quiet. And I do not owe anyone my silence. Applause burst out before the crowd even realized it had started clapping. I have referred these matters to the Judicial Oversight Committee, the Attorney General's office, and the State Inspector General. This is not a negotiation. This is not a plea. This is a line in the sand. If you target my office, if you undermine this court, if you try to drag this city back into the shadows of the past, you will face me, and I don't bluff. The applause this time was thunderous, not just clapping, cheering, shouts of yes, ma'am.
That's
our judge. Even a chant began, Mariah, Mariah. Councilman Harlan watched from inside, his car across the street, his lips curled in fury. He didn't say a word, but his hand slammed the dashboard hard enough to crack it. Later that evening, WDBH aired the speech uncut. Clips flooded the internet major. Publications picked it up. The judge who refused to sit down Brookhaven's reckoning. One woman's courtroom revolution. Even national outlets began speculating, will Judge Jordan run for Senate? The sieve the south shifting beneath our feet? But Mariah wasn't interested in politics, not yet. She still had cases to close, systems to expose, and now it's people to protect. Because power doesn't go quietly that night. A fire was set behind the courthouse, a small one in a dumpster, but enough to scorch evidence bins that had just been updated. The message was clear. They weren't done. Mariah stood at the scene as firefighters sprayed the last of the smoke. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. But inside, a new layer of steel hardened across her bones. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was a fight for everyone who'd ever been silenced, sidelined, or stomped under the weight of a crooked system that grinned while it crushed. The next morning, she began drafting what would become her most controversial move yet, a judicial order calling for the full audit of all police body cam footage from the past 5 years, to be reviewed by a neutral committee of civil rights attorneys and forensic analysts. No more cover-ups. No more sealed files. The darkness was getting pulled into the light, and Brookhaven wasn't ready. But Mariah was. Mariah Jordan's signature ink dried on the order just before dawn. The document, 8 pages long and backed by case law precedent. In a searing moral thesis, it's called for the most expansive police audit in Brookhaven's history, body cam. Footage, complaint records, use force logs, arrest demographics, all of it. Open to civilian oversight and state-level scrutiny, it was the kind of transparency that shook the bones of crooked men, and she knew the retaliation would be swift. The first blow came by 10 a.m. The Brookhaven Police Union filed an emergency injunction, claiming the order violated officer privacy and endangered ongoing investigations. But the judge assigned to hear it? Mariah's longtime colleague, a black female jurist from upstate named Judge Oletta Banks, just happened to be visiting the district for training. In Judge Banks, she denied the injunction. With prejudice, the public does not fear transparency. Only those who abuse their power do, she wrote in her ruling. The second blow came from the inside. Mariah received a letter marked confidential, slid under her door. It was unsigned, but typed in courier font. The content was chilling. There is a dossier with your name on it. Evidence is being planted. They plan to destroy your career before the audit begins. You have enemies in your chambers. Watch the man with the red cufflinks. Mariah read it 3 times, the red cufflinks. Her mind snapped to Benton. Wilder, a newly appointed junior court clerk, always wore bright red cufflinks, like they were a badge of honor. She'd barely paid him attention until now. She would now. But the third blow, that came in the form of a midnight leak. An anonymous account on social media uploaded a grainy video, heavily edited, claiming to show Mariah in a compromising conversation with a defense attorney. The video was spliced from 2 separate clips, one from her chambers, the other from an old Zoom call taken out of context. The caption read, "Corrupt Judge Exposed." It trended by 2 a.m. Fox News picked it up by 3. By 5 a.m., Mariah was trending worldwide. But what her enemies didn't count on? Brookhaven was already changing. By 6 a.m., a dozen lawyers, including her former law professor, issued statements calling the clip fraudulent, doctored, and defamatory. By 7 a.m., hundreds of local residents marched peacefully to the courthouse steps, holding candles and signs that read, "We believe Judge Jordan truth can't be towed. Her calm is louder than your corruption." By 9 a.m., Mariah Jordan walked through the crowd in silence, robes flowing, shoulders squared, and entered court to resume her docket unfazed. And inside, every pew was filled, not with press, not with politicians, but with regular people, the ones who'd watched, waited, and finally seen a woman who looked like them hold the gavel with unshaking hands. But behind the scenes, got it. War was still brewing. Councilman Harlan called an emergency meeting. Sheriff Rudd threatened to resign. Old power was reeling in one group. Quiet but furious internal faction calling themselves the Chain Crew began meeting after hours to destroy Mariah by any means necessary. They weren't just afraid of her rulings anymore. They were afraid of what she inspired, afraid of what she represented, A judge who couldn't be bought, bent, or bullied. A woman who never raised her voice because her silence already roared. And deep down, they knew she wasn't just coming for their seats. She was coming for their systems. The court calendar looked normal. Routine hearings, sentencing reviews, a pre-trial motion on a weapons charge. But Judge Mariah Jordan had learned that in Brookhaven. Normal was the most dangerous disguise of all. She leaned back in her leather chair just past sunrise, sipping tea instead of coffee, chamomile, not for calm, but to coat her voice. She was going to need it. Her docket was about to be the least of her concerns. The fax machine sputtered behind her, an old model, likely hadn't been replaced in 20 years. But it still worked, still carried secrets. She rose heels quiet against the polished wood floor and pulled the fax from the tray. It was a single sheet, no cover, just a message in bold type. Check the DAS case file on People versus Jay Connor. The evidence log was changed. The body cam footage is missing 17 minutes. No name, no signature, just a second handwritten line at the bottom. Red cufflinks was there. He knows. Mariah folded the paper, slid it into the lining of her coat, and walked to court with fire. Behind her eyes, the case in question, People versus Jerome Connor, was a robbery charge. Nothing flashy. No headlines. But Mariah remembered the defendant, a 17-year-old senior. No priors. Track team captain. Arrested after police claimed he robbed a corner store while wearing a navy hoodie, except the store clerk hadn't been able to ID him clearly in his hoodie. It was school-issued, the kind half the teens in town wore. Still, the DA insisted they had video evidence and a clean confession. Mariah had approved discovery. But the body cam footage had been delayed twice, supposedly due to a corrupted server now. She was told it didn't exist at all. Gone, vanished, wiped. She called a recess in court and returned to chambers. Benton Wilder, the clerk with the red cufflinks, was waiting at her door, holding a fresh folder. "Morning, Judge," he said, too cheerfully. "Thought I'd bring this up to save you the trip." He handed her the Connor file. She noticed it immediately. The paper, stock felt different, newer, reprinted. She opened the folder and scanned the evidence log. Neatly typed, cleaned. Up. To clean. "What happened to the original?" she asked without looking up. "Beg pardon?" he replied. "The original log? This one's new. It wasn't printed on court paper stock. The seal is digital, not embossed." He paused, then smiled. It must be a newer system. They're updating all the old forms." She looked at him, dead in the eyes. "Not in this courthouse. Not without my approval." He opened his mouth again. She raised a finger, and that was enough. She dismissed him with a nod and closed the door behind him. The second he was gone, she opened the secret file she kept locked behind her bench, a duplicate archive of every evidence entry submitted under her docket number, and there it was. A different log, an original timestamp. Body cam footage listed as included full duration, 1 HR 12 min. Her pulse didn't quicken. She was too seasoned for that. Instead, she whispered, "They're not just lying, they're erasing." What Mariah didn't know yet was that this case, this one quiet case about a scared teenager, was the canary in the coal mine, a test run. If they could rewrite evidence here, they could do it again and again, until reality bent to power and records only said what they wanted them to. But they'd miscalculated. Mariah wasn't a figurehead. She was a watchdog in heels, and now she was tracking them. That night, she didn't go home. Instead, she drove to an old friend's house in a part of town rarely visited by court staff. Alyssa Boone, former criminal investigator turned private data consultant. Tough, sharp, and loyal to Mariah, since they both worked juvenile cases in Atlanta. Alyssa greeted her with a hug. No words. Inside, they dimmed the lights, locked the phones in a Faraday bag, and pulled out the court file together. Mariah placed the forged log next to the original. Alyssa whistled low. "This is surgical," she said. "They didn't just delete.
Oh.
They rebuilt from scratch. Whoever did this has access to back-end records, not just front-facing logs. Mariah exhaled. And probably law enforcement credentials. Alyssa nodded. I'll scan the metadata, but Judge. She leaned in. You're in open waters now. This isn't just politics. This is conspiracy. Mariah folded her arms. Then, let's get a bigger boat. The following morning, Mariah sat alone in chambers as the courthouse buzzed just beyond her door. Her robe hung neatly on the back of the chair, untouched. Her hair was pulled back into a single coiled braid. No makeup, no earrings. It's just clean skin and sharper instincts. In front of her sat the metadata report Alyssa Boone had sent overnight. It was worse than she expected. The altered bodycam log hadn't just been rewritten. It had been replaced by an internal case management system user ID. One registered to an officer who was supposed to be on medical leave at the time of the edit, Detective Joel Marks. Cop with a record of excessive force complaints, none of which had ever gone to disciplinary hearing. Mariah remembered his name. He'd testified in multiple cases, always clean, always by the book. Until now, she stared at the screen. A judge's. Tools were supposed to be impartial. Facts, records, sworn statements. But what happens when even the records lie? She tapped a finger against her mug, then pulled open a drawer. Inside was a burner phone Alyssa had given her months ago, just in case. Mariah dialed a private number. 1 ring. 2. Then Boone. It's real, Mariah said. The manipulation goes through a retired ID. Then someone's either spoofing it or he was never really on leave. I want to meet him discreetly. You're playing with matches in a powder keg, Judge. Lit it the second I signed the audit order. This is just the flame. Catching up a pause. Then Alyssa sighed. All right, I'll find him. But you're not going alone. Later that day, Mariah took the long route home, unmarked sedan. Tinted windows. Just in case. At a quiet gas station on the outskirts of town, she waited in the back lot. At exactly 6:17 p.m., a rust-colored pickup rolled up beside her. The man who stepped out looked haggard, thinner than his last court appearance. Wearing a hoodie, baseball cap, and a limp in his right leg, Detective Joel Marks. He didn't look like a man on vacation. He looked like a man in hiding. You shouldn't be here, he muttered. I know, she replied. But neither should. You. He looked around nervously, then got in the passenger seat. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, they used my login, said it was routine, said they needed temporary access to backfill some forms for a pending case. What case? Mariah asked. Didn't say. I didn't ask. You should have. He looked away. I started poking around 2 weeks ago. 3 days later, I found a dead cat nailed to my door. No note, just blood and rusted nails. Mariah winced, but said nothing. They're watching me. Watching you too, I bet. This ain't about one kid's case anymore. This is cleanup, and you're a stain they can't scrub out. The air in the car turned heavy, Mariah processed. It all in silence. Finally, she said, I need everything you have. Screenshots, logs, badge access times. If they're moving through fake credentials, I want their whole route mapped. Joel hesitated, then handed her a USB drive, wrapped in a torn piece of duct tape. It's not everything, he whispered, but it's a start. Just promise me something, what? When they come for you, and they will, don't trust anyone in uniform. Not even the ones who smile in court. She pocketed the drive and nodded. I stopped trusting smiles. The day they laughed as they towed my car. Back in her apartment, Mariah sat alone at the kitchen table. No music. No TV. Just her laptop, the USB. And the sound of her own breathing. Click. A folder opened. Inside, dozens of internal memos. Badge logs. Access time discrepancies. And a trail of evidence tampering that stretched back 6 years. Names repeated. Dates. Overlapped. But one pattern chilled her to her core. Every single manipulated. Case involved a black or Latino defendant, and each one involved arrests by a single task force, Metro Crime Initiative Unit Division C. That unit was dissolved. In 2021, officially, It had been restructured due to funding. It had been buried until now. Mariah didn't sleep that night. She printed copies, marked timelines, mapped relationships, and by sunrise. She had a full board on her living room wall, strings connecting officers, clerks, council members, and even one assistant DA who had suddenly gone on sabbatical last month without explanation. Brookhaven wasn't corrupt. It was engineered. A machine. And she had just found the blueprint. In the morning, she returned to court like nothing had changed. Robes. Crisp. Heels steady. Voice calm, but underneath it all, she carried a new weight. Not fear, not anger. Proof, and now. She was ready to drop it like a gavel on every name pinned to her wall. The envelope arrived without return address. Plain white. No markings. Slid under. Her chamber door, in the dead of night. Mariah paused before opening it. Something about the weight of the paper made her chest tighten. Inside. One thing. One she had never seen before. Stamped. Confidential. Do not unseal without Chief APP. Off a case name sent a chill up her spine. Mariah remembered the name. Jerome Connor. Black teenager. Accused of armed robbery. Sentenced. In a lightning-fast trial. No parents in court. Out. No media coverage. 15 years without parole. It had always bothered her, even when she wasn't the judge on record. Now, the case was staring back at her with blood on its edges. She opened it, and inside were two versions of the same body cam footage. Version A, the one used in court. Version B, the one never submitted. In version A, the footage was grainy, jerky, and cut after 15 seconds. In version B, the full story unfolded. Jerome had his hands up. He had no weapon. He asked the officer, "Can I call my mom?" Then came the tackle, the cuffs, the off-camera voice. "Just say he reached for something, Judge will send it." Mariah froze. That voice. She rewound the footage. Played it again. The man's voice wasn't an officer's. It was someone administrative. Someone familiar. Her mind went to the letter she'd received weeks ago. Watched the man with the red cufflinks. She thought of Benton Wilder, the new court clerk. Always to present. Always too informed. Always. Watching Mariah didn't sleep that night. Instead, she compiled everything into a separate file. A flash drive. One she stored inside a hollowed-out law textbook on her shelf. Right next to her. Childhood copy of The Bluest. She knew what this meant now. Someone in her court, someone in her house, was part of the cover-up. The next morning, she did what they never expected. She placed the case back on her docket. She scheduled a review hearing, and she signed the order in red ink. The whispers began immediately. The DA called her chambers in a fury. "Judge Jordan, we need to speak." That case was closed 3 years ago. Mariah interrupted him. It was never supposed to be closed. It was supposed to be buried. Click. She hung up. At lunch, Benton Wilder knocked softly on her door. "Judge, I had just wanted to say I noticed you reopened the Connor file." "That's unusual, isn't it?" Mariah smiled without warmth. "I guess I'm unusual." He hesitated. Then his eyes moved just for a split second to the flash drive on her desk. When he left, she checked the handle of her chamber door. It had fresh scratches. Someone had tried to pick the lock. Later that evening, she met quietly with Detective Larissa Hoyle. One of the few officers she trusted, a sharp, black woman with a braid down her back and a permanent line between her brows. "I need you to verify something," Mariah said, handing her a copy of the body cam files. Larissa watched the footage. In silence, when it ended, she just said, "I'll be back by midnight." Mariah sat back in her chair, heart pounding. She looked out the window toward the courthouse steps, where once, not long ago, she was just a woman being laughed at as her car was towed. Now, they weren't laughing, they were watching. And she had something they feared more than outrage. Proof, and so. As Judge Mariah Jordan stood once more on those courthouse steps, where they once laughed as they towed her car, Now the crowd stood in silence. Not in fear, but in awe. Reporters called her name. Survivors of wrongful convictions held signs that read, "Thank you, Judge Jordan." The Department of Justice had opened a full-scale investigation. Warrants were served. Officers were indicted. Clerks confessed. The machine had cracked wide open. But Mariah didn't smile for the cameras. Instead, she looked out at the city that once tried to break her, then raised her chin and spoke with quiet fire. "You didn't believe me when I said justice isn't blind. But now you see her clearly, and she looks like me." Oh. In that moment, under the weight of every file she reopened, every voice she uplifted, and every lie she shattered, the city saw not just a judge, they saw a reckoning. And Mariah Jordan, radiant in her truth, walked back inside that courthouse not to prove she belonged, but to remind them she never needed their permission to rule. The gavel had fallen. This time it echoed for everyone. The end.